So we're going to move to our next speaker who's going to share insights on SEO. And what I heard yesterday, which I thought was really interesting, is when we think about SEO, I know I have clients, and perhaps you do as well, or you've had this experience where people are talking about SEO content. The advice we heard yesterday and the insight was it's not necessarily about SEO content. And I think what we're going to hear from Abernathy from Yext is some guidance around that. You know, how do we navigate SEO, some best practices, some insights, and I think some trends as it relates to our favorite topic, which of course is generative AI. So I think Adam's going to pull it all together for us, and please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Adam Abernathy from Yext. I'm the Senior Director of the Applied Technologies Lab. And a lot of my job is to help us position all of our technologies and to kind of bring that value realization piece to it. And a lot of my research work and what I usually talk about is how, kind of like where the internet kind of came from and kind of where it's going and how to ultimately prepare for it. Anybody seen this photo before? You guys know what this might be? There's quite a bit of a detail here, but it's missing something. What's it missing? It's missing a little bit of context. In that context, when we added a little bit of context to it, like the photo kind of pops out, it's clearly a cow. This is a classic experiment done by Evelyn Langor in her book and her research work called Mindfulness. And it's really about, we see a lot of things, there's a lot of data and information around us, but we need context to help understand it. And I find this to be a really beautiful analogy for technical SEO and kind of why it's important. Because the technical SEO is going to ultimately help us link all of our information together and make it presentable to search and to models. So technology is always increasing. Moore's Law, this concept that came out in the late 50s, early 60s, basically states that we can double the ability to put transistors on a microchip, and then that doubles every 2 years at nominal cost. Layman's terms, it allows us to double our ability to produce technology every 2 years. So just taking a quick look at kind of where we came. At 27 years ago, 1996, 1997, when Google started, the Motorola StarTAC was the primary cell phone. At the time, it was the first really widely available cell phone. And Google had roughly 26 million documents or pages or internet assets in their index. And then by 2008, there was about 1 trillion unique URLs listed in Google's index. And by 2016, 160 trillion. And then things got so big in 2020 that they actually had to start thinking about how do we slim this back down? How do we make something more usable? Because they basically couldn't archive everything and they couldn't really search through it all. So in 2020, they started rethinking what is search and what goes into it, and they basically shrunk that index down to about 400 billion different URLs. And today, everything that we do is online, somehow. And as a result, the way we seek information has definitely changed. Like I said, the web's no longer nascent, it's no longer novel, and it's moved from cat videos to and sharing music to really this functional part of our daily lives. And as a result, there's less consumer appetite to go searching and looking and trying to find stuff because we've become accustomed to, going to Google, asking it a targeted question and getting a meaningful response almost immediately. So here in Canada, 86% of our households have at least one cell phone, and of that, about 80% of users, they're going to use Google to find some sort of answer. But what's important for us to start thinking about, especially because generative AI has been kind of the big thing, is the entire search industry is about to be flipped upside down. This is due to decentralization, which is stuff like voice search, the Hey Siri. They get it to pop up anywhere? Usually works. So like voice search, this is the Hey Siri, Hey Google, et cetera. It's also things like ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera. These are decentralized models that ultimately read the whole internet and then package up an answer. So in response, Gartner's basically predicting that Google's going to see a 25% drop in search by 2026. And so none of this is really too surprising, because Gen Z, they're kind of up and coming. They're also the first they're the first fully digital generation. About 52% of them actually trust generative AI's responses to make important life decisions. And so I believe that we're long gone past the days of the traditional computer and that traditional experience, and we're really in this kind of browserless transformation right now. So question, how many hours a day do Canadians spend online? Just like total as a country. Does anybody have an idea? How many? 10 hours a day per person? What about the whole country? Just roughly. More than 94% of Canadians are online. It's actually about a point higher than in the United States. And it's growing at about 1.5% per year. We spend about 6.5 hours a day online, on average. And that's looking at little microtransactions of where's something to where's a coffee, where's something to eat, where that's also looking up something for work, et cetera, et cetera. And we search for quite a bit of stuff. And by 2025, we expect about 86% of all web traffic to be mobile, and up from about 79% today. So the internet's really where we spend a lot of our time. It's how we find answers to our daily questions, and we're not only adapting to the internet, but the internet's really adapting to us. So how will brands continue to compete in this ever-changing landscape? And I'll start by saying this. I believe that the SEO bid, it's not a religion, it's not a science, it's really just a set of best practices in order to get computers to speak to each other. In full disclosure, I'm a very reluctant marketer. My background's actually in physics and computational physics, and I was very reluctant to start a marketing career, but I was hired to basically help scale large brands at scale. And so I worked with a lot of SEO experts, and they really harped on generating content, a lot of content, writing blog posts, all keyword analysis, all this kind of stuff. But as someone with a systems analyst background, I was like, computers are really good at talking to each other. And if search models and the LLMs were starting to come out at the time, back where I was at in academia, they need context to understand what's going on. So I thought about it, I was like, well, if we build out these technical SEO practices really well, then then computers can ultimately talk to each other. Thus, I felt that was a stronger play. And it definitely panned out. So technical SEO is all the non-creative, it's the non-marketing materials part of your SEO strategy. This is basically broken into two main categories. You have on-page and off-page. Your on-page is stuff like semantic HTML. This is well-structured HTML that ultimately tells web browsers, it tells parsers and crawlers what it is on your page, and it gives it context around that. This is also stuff like good CSS, make things more performant, good UX, having a robots.txt, sitemaps. I know this may all sound kind of trivial, but these are the stuff I tell our clients on a regular basis, and we're always discovering these things. Also leveraging schema.org and JSON LD data. This is one of the single most powerful things besides semantic HTML to ultimately tell your browser, so when the parsers crawl it, or a search engine crawls it, or an LLM is reading that stuff in, it knows context about what it is that's on that page. It gives it narrative around your narrative. Stuff like making pages crawlable and indexable, fix all the 404s, et cetera. Page speed is one of the biggest things. Deloitte found that a 1 second increase in page speed, basically page time to functionality, decreases conversion by about 20%. For retail, my background was recently in healthcare, and I saw almost the exact same thing there. And also to avoid a lot of advertising distractions. Because again, your web page needs to be consumable by all these crawlers and all these models. And there's off-page SEO. And this is where we get into long-tail strategies, which I'm going to talk here about in a second. And so while Google doesn't really tell us what the weighted value of technical SEO is, they hammer it pretty hard in all their developer documentation. And they directly say to focus on the content and to help provide a great page experience. And so in my experience, we focused really strong on the technical piece, and we've pretty much crushed it when it comes to local pack and stuff like that. I'd like for you to think of your marketing strategy as a molecule with kind of each element or consumer endpoint basically bound together by electrons. But think of those electrons as your data. So how do you orchestrate the consistency across all this network of endpoints? And I found that it's more efficient to sit down and kind of focus on modeling what your brand is and what you want your consumers to be doing before setting your brand narrative into play. A good digital footprint's composed of, you have a web page, obviously you have that good on-page technical SEO there, listings and directory service providers, reviews, that's a big part of the ecosystem now, and for many businesses, social is definitely part of that. Generative AI is producing quite a bit of content, but I think it's important that we need to keep our eyes on the ball and keeping that content really focused on what it is about your narrative and creating concise conversations with your customers. Remember to create, as I said, remember to kind of create those people-first content, right? You want to help users answer questions. Historically, we've often thought of the web page as more in your web presence as like a brochure, right? Things have transitioned. People are now searching for specific answers. They've already landed on your page. You don't need to sell them on it. They're there to ask a specific question, and they're looking for a specific answer. And so think of it more of like an FAQ, really well blown out with your with like your data strategy and like your narrative. If you have a really good data strategy behind it, then your narrative can follow, and then you can adjust your narrative as it goes. You can adjust to different trends in the market. You can adjust to the external environment really easily. You're not having to go back and rethink, what does my digital footprint look like? So let's dive into what good structured data can can do for you. So this is all the off-page, kind of like the long tail piece. This is a customer, or sorry, this is not a customer, but this is a person who came to Yext's. We have a free tool called Knowledge Scan, and they've come there pretty regularly over a span of about 1.5 years, and they were running knowledge scans to see what information was about them out online. And this kind of got us thinking. In the research group, we were like, well, a lot of people talk about like long tail, but we never really had any kind of definitive answers on it. So what we did is we kind of started looking at this, and we visualized it, and you can tell what we suspect. What they did is they basically focused on Google, probably being in like Apple, kind of like the big players, Facebook, and they updated information there, and then they let that try to propagate across, so that like, network effects take over. And as you can see, it's pretty sporadic. Even like different variables change, different update cadences change, et cetera. This guy's really thinking. So we looked at about 570,000 locations that were in our database for customers that use our listings product. And what we basically looked at, and we kind of shook them out, what we wanted to do was to measure of like long tail platform publishers, how many of them were in different places, and then what was their overall trust signal? Because this gets into, as we look at like the models and giving the model confidence in the information that you're putting out there, it needs to have trust. So we had about 570,000 locations that had listings and some sort of web presence for over 1 year. And so we ran this originally March to March. We've essentially run it for April to April, and we got the same results. And we basically shook out into kind of 3 main buckets. And they're nonlinear. So the smallest one was less than 50% of the network, then 50 to 75, and then greater than 75%. And like I said, we measured traffic from the Google listings back to the brand website. We used listings, or we used the clicks, because that was like a really strong and uniform indicator of conversion. And our data definitely tells us, and the results I'll show you in a second, that long tail really matters, and this really disproves this kind of thinking that you can just focus on the big search engines and then just hope everything else is going to work on the other side. We call this rest of network RON, but for short, and we believe that it's really part of like a really strong SEO strategy. Because again, models, what they're looking for is there's a ton of information out there, and they're looking for consistency. So if you think about it this way, you have a really wide breadth of information out there, and then is it consistent? And is it consistent? So if you plot it this way, that is trust. Underneath that graph is trust, and models are looking for trust. And so again, SEO is really going through a major transformation because search is going through a major transformation right now. And I think that it's important for, as you're looking at like localized listings, such as say like wealth advisors or local bank branches or whatever, you need to, you have to orchestrate that information at scale. There it goes. So Google's in the business of delivering quality answers, so people come back. That's their whole thing, right? That's how they make money. And LLMs, such as Google's SGE, ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, they're starting to use this concept called grounding. This is where that trust vector really comes back into play. So the LLM will go out and it will create some sort of answer. You ask it a question, and then it's going to go out, it's going to look at its own database, and it's going to come up with an answer. It's going to spit that out. But before it sends it back to the user, it's going to go out and it's going to check against where it thinks it can find a trustworthy signal. It's going to check a few of those. It's called grounding. And what it does is if it finds inconsistencies in those signals coming back, it tends to go back and modify its answer again until it can find some sort of, kind of converge on some sort of consistency. Google's SGE does this normally. ChatGPT 4.0 does this. ChatGPT 5 will be fully doing this. And then Apple Intelligence, which they announced the other day, also uses this principle too. So again, it's really important to have a really wide digital footprint and to have it really consistent, because any inconsistency in that kind of breaks down that trust. It's the same as if you're going to a new restaurant and it's got 2 5-star reviews or like 150 4-star reviews. Which one are you going to end up trusting? Probably one of the 150 4-star reviews. There's just more of it. It's a more consistent signal. So again, we looked at like those 570,000 locations for a year, and like I talked about the bins like a second ago. And what you can see is you start getting these kind of amplification network effects that start to occur. So in that second bin, when they started using over 50% of the available publishers, it doesn't have to be every single publisher. You're not going to list a wealth advisor on like Postmates or like DoorDash. You're not. But if you're a restaurant, you're going to, or something like that. You're going to want to list them where it makes sense to list you. But when you basically cross that upper threshold, there's a 95% additional lift when it over just using less than half. Because what Google's seen is it's seen you have a wider footprint and it's really consistent. It's kind of the main theme here. Models are looking for consistency and they're looking for context. Over 75%, nearly a 200% lift, right? This is because Google has more trust in that, they're going to show you more. Now you can infer from this that you're ranking higher, but that's clearly, this is measured and observed traffic back to a brand's website. So it definitely shows that there's a strong correlation between number of publishers synced and the performance on Google, strongly supporting the claim that long tail is really, it has to be part of your strategy going forward in this age of model-generated results. So in layman's terms, Google really cares and rewards locations that have a wider footprint and they're consistent. There we go. There's also this kind of amplification effect that you get from other network effects, and there's additional benefits. We also observe that if you perform well on Google, you perform well elsewhere. Again, and then Google sees that, you end up performing well on Google. It's a little kind of cyclic there. So in addition to direct website traffic coming from Google, we've also noticed about a 17% lift from non-Google sources back to the brand's website. And so again, network effects. And this goes to show that Google might be your primary source of web traffic. There's an additional lift when it comes to other ones. Again, there's like a listings conversation happening here, but keep in mind all these LLMs and all that stuff that are generating and understanding things about your brand and your narrative, they're ingesting all of this. They're also using this context to help power the result. So to kind of recap, you want to have that full network of publishers, pretty wide scale, and there's a strong correlation between like breadth and trust and like the trust piece. So by this point, you're thinking, you told us all about this technical SEO and these kind of two kind of boring plays that I can make and ultimately to help get better results from models and to have the models better represent my brand. But how do I go back and show the value of this? It's not really a direct or a linear path, but if you simply just took the non-Google lift of that 17%, that's an additional 17% that you didn't have before that you can go convert into revenue. It's really important, the way we're using the web, we've really changed it. We're really, people are less willing to go read through a bunch of stuff. They really tend to skip, they kind of glaze over about 200, 250 words in a page. And so when they search the web, they've got a specific question, you want to target them with a specific answer. And so you really want to reduce that clutter and content and focus on your brand's narrative. but have a well-engineered digital footprint that can be consumed. Again, providing all that context. Back to the cow picture, right? That red line is context around what it is that you're trying to represent. We've really entered this new era of computing, one where chat-based interfaces and much of the interfaces, which will be much of the interface that your brand has nowadays, is just where we're heading. It's going to represent the information that you share. There's going to be less direct back to your branded websites and more just going through search, right? And so it's important to think about how do I best organize and distribute my information. So to kind of wrap this up, and I'll take a few questions, kind of the key takeaways here is we're in this browserless transformation, and it's time to definitely invest in technical SEO and structured data and to create great content for people, right? If the content and the experience is good, people will engage with it. But if you have really good technical SEO, then models and search and all that can ingest it and then have understanding about what it is that your narrative and what it is about like products or services, et cetera. So thank you for the invite to speak here, and I'll take a few questions. None.
Sorry, thanks. Wondering if you were surprised by the Google link, where they released the paperwork. Sorry, it shows. It's not working. Right?
I can hear you, and I'll repeat the question.
Okay, yeah, I'm wondering if you've heard about the Google leak and what you took away from the Google leak and what was important in that for us to know.
Were we surprised about the Google leak and what we found in there, and
Yeah.
what were we surprised about it? I don't think we really were. I think we've been looking at this problem from a very analytical perspective for quite some time, and I felt we are still, in transparency, we're still looking deep into those documents. But we feel like what we're seeing and what we're seeing in there definitely aligns with what we found just via observational research. Did that answer the question? Okay. Oh, no. We are working on, what we are working on right now is we're starting to look at frequency of updates, basically demonstrating is the more you update and the more you publish, that cadence, if that creates lift or not. We're currently researching that right now. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you again.
Thanks.